para continuar con esta segunda sesión, a continuación vamos a hablar un poco del currículum de la ponente, que estará dándoles la plática en esta sesión 2, las necesidades de nutrientes, y para ello voy a presentar un poco del currículum de la doctora. La doctora tiene una formación, un máster en nutrición equina y fisiología del ejercicio. Tiene un doctorado en nutrición y en reproducción equina, ambos otorgados por el Instituto Politécnico de Virginia. Y respecto a las actividades profesionales que realiza, ella es miembro del staff del Kentucky Equine Research durante 20 años. Es responsable del soporte especializado a nivel nacional e internacional a los socios del Kentucky Equine Research. En la formulación de dietas, da soporte a la producción de empaques para alimentos para caballos y además asesora profesionalmente a los programas individuales en nutrición para caballos deportivos y conferencista también en eventos internacionales. Como parte de la actividad privada que desarrolla la doctora, participa principalmente en competencias de enduro en sus caballos árabes. Respecto al área de investigación, principalmente se dedica a la investigación en equinos y cuenta con numerosas publicaciones a lo largo de su actividad profesional. Demos la bienvenida a la doctora KATHLEEN CRANDELL. Bienvenida, doctora. Adelante.
Sorry for the technical difficulties. I think we have it together now. I just want to thank the organizers for the invitation to speak at this impressive conference. I'm going to be speaking on the NRC feeding system. So the first thing I need to explain is that what I will be referring to is actually the nutrient requirements of horses. We have this habit of calling it the NRC because this publication, the Nutrient Requirement Horses, was actually put together by the National Research Council, which we, in short, is NRC. So I just wanted to make that clear. And then I'll be talking a little bit about a little bit of the background on how we came about to have this NRC. And then I'm going to go in a little bit onto the chapters and tables and appendix. And then I'm going to finish with using the NRC. So why did we make an NRC? In the 1800s, it was an age of discovery. Scientists were fascinated with discovering how things work, and the true nature of nutrients was just being unraveled and being defined by those the ones that we know today as proteins, starch and sugars, fats, fibers, vitamins, and minerals. So the U.S. government, they wanted to tap into this newfound expertise of the scientists and the researchers. So they formed a private, non-governmental institution to advise them on the issues of science and technology. During the tenure of President Lincoln in 1863, the National Academy of Sciences was formed. So since this was during the Civil War here in the United States, most of the advice that this National Academy of Sciences was giving to the government would have been on weapons and warfare. But after the war was over, the NAS continued to serve the government as an advisory position. So in 1916, it was President Wilson who requested that the National Academy of Sciences establish a National Research Council. And this was so that he could bring in expertise from a broader spectrum of the scientific and technology communities to advise the government. So the National Academy of Sciences, the vision is a nation and a world in which people understand science to be foundational in their lives and recognized the NAS scientific advice as the gold standard for evidence-based decision-making that benefits society. And their mission is the National Academies provide independent, trustworthy advice and facilitate solutions to complex challenges by mobilizing expertise, practice, and knowledge in science, engineering, and medicine. Now, the 2 points that I would like to you to take away from this is, number one, that that this academy is providing scientific advice that's evidence-based, okay? And then the other thing that I'd like you to take away from it is that it's non-governmental, so it's an unbiased opinion. So in 1928, there was a push in the National Research Council to gather expertise on animal nutrition because of the importance of agricultural to the country's economy. In 1944, they made the decision to start putting together reports on nutrient requirements on farm animals. That was to help with others more than just the government. So these would be able to be spread out through the whole community of scientists, producers, veterinarians, et cetera. And all of these publications would be published by the National Academies Press. So this NRC, I'm going to use that term, it generates species-specific reports that serve as an authoritative source of state-of-the-art recommendations for meeting nutrient requirements of agricultural animal, companion animal, and aquaculture species. So the end results of these, they decided, after the NRC decided to publish the reports on poultry, swine, dairy, beef, cattle, and sheep, in 1949, they went ahead and put together one on the recommended nutrient allowances for horses. So 12 years later, in 1961, they revised the report and they renamed it the Nutrient Requirements for Horses, and it's been that name ever since. There were revisions in 1966, 73, 78, and 89. And the committee decided to put together a committee for the next edition, which in 2004, and that report was released in 2007. So here are the 6 reports. Actually, the first one, I apologize. I could not find a picture of the horse one, and this one is sheep, but the horse one would have looked just like this one. And what I would like to point out here is that in 1944, the report was only 29 pages, and it grew a little bit in 61 and 66 from 32 to 34 pages. It almost doubled there in 78 to 54 pages, almost doubled it again in 89 to 100 pages. But the most recent edition is a total of 341 pages. So it was a significant expansion of the information that's in this book. And the other thing I'd like to point out is that they started in 1944 with a committee of 3 people, and then they had 4 and 5 in subsequent editions and 6 for the 78 and 89 edition. But they were the committee that did the 2007 report was 11 different researchers. So the purpose of the publications are to review the existing scientific literature relating to nutrition and feeding, and to summarize the information relating to nutrient requirements of various physiological classes. So a little bit of the background behind the 2007 version. I mean, it was 18 years in the making, in between the version before that. There was a report from the American Horse Council that kind of motivated the NRC to update their version. And what was in that report was that there were over 9 million horses in the United States, Over 2 million people were involved in the horse industry. The impact of the horse industry was valued over $1 billion. These horses were used for various purposes: recreation, sport, exhibition, breeding, therapy, ranch, farm work. We know that the type of use, age, and physiological state affect the nutrient requirements. And horses distributed around the globe are subjected to a variety of climates and housing conditions. And effective feeding management practices must consider many factors, including nutrient requirements, environmental conditions, and the available feeds. So resources are needed by professional nutritionists, veterinarians, feed manufacturers, researchers, teachers, students, and horse owners. And so they really pushed the NRC to update the last edition. So the 6th edition, published in 2007, had the following members as their committee. These are like very prominent names in research for equine horses and equine in the US, and then also Canada and the UK. Lori Lawrence, Nadia Simbaluk, David Freeman, Raymond Gore, Patricia Graham-Tiers, Annette Longland, Brian Nielsen, Paul Siciliano, Donald Topliff, Eduardo Valdez, who happened to not have been an equine nutritionist. He was a wild animal nutrition. And then Robert Van Sam. So what was different about this book? I mean, to go from 100 to 341 pages? Well, there was a lot of research in equine nutrition in between 1989 and 2005. And so this book attempts to incorporate the most relevant of this research. They wanted to put updated information on nutrient requirements of domestic horses and ponies. They wanted to expand the information on general considerations on equine feeding management. And they wanted to include discussions on feeding management of other equids like donkeys and wild horses in captivity. They wanted another chapter on feeding management of horses with nutritionally related disorders. And they wanted to try to put in a web-based computer program that would help assist users in determining nutrient requirements of domestic horses and ponies of specific physiological classes. So what you find in this book, you'll find chapters on energy, and then there's chapters on each of the different nutrients, like carbohydrates, which would include the structural carbohydrates and the non-structural carbohydrates, and then fats and protein and amino acids, macro and micro minerals, vitamins, water, and then some interesting chapters also on feed and feed processing, feed additives, feed analysis. And in the chapter on unique aspects of feeding is when they address the nutritional related disorders. And then feeding management of donkeys and wild equids, and ration formulation and evaluation and computer model to estimate requirements. Chapter 16 is tables, and these are probably the most used of anything in the book, at least in my book. The nutrient requirement tables, the feed composition tables, composition of mare's milk tables, and then conversion factors. And in the appendix, you can find more information about abbreviations and acronyms, the biographies of the committee members, and then also the index. So just a little bit about what's in each of these chapters. Where did the committee come up with these requirements? Where do they come from? Well, some of these requirements come from equine specific research, but a lot of them are extrapolated from other livestock. And the earlier versions had even more extrapolated from other livestock. In the 1940s and 60s, there was a lot of basic research being conducted on horses. I mean, these were like the basic requirements. So, for example, they would feed a purified diet that was deficient in a specific nutrient that they were looking at for as long as it took to start showing the signs of deficiency, and then record what they saw with those deficiencies. And this is a bit brutal and cruel, I mean, by today's standards. And so in the 1980s, researchers started looking for better ways to test nutrients, and they came up with some things. Like one thing would be like a functional test. When I did my PhD research, I used a functional test called the relative dose response. So when the committee was trying to incorporate new research into the book, they had to decide whether to change the current recommendation or the existing recommendation, or to keep the old one. And in order for them to change something, there had to be significant proof that it needed to be changed. And however, in the text of the chapters, you can find that the committee will mention the research that maybe suggests that there needs to be a change, or it could be a little bit different than what is currently recommended. This book, the 2007 version, definitely has a lot more detailed discussion on each of the nutrients than any of the versions past. And so it is basically up to the user, because they put the information into the chapters. The user can decide whether they want to use the values that they suggest or the values that are in some of the more recent research. So an example of this might be the 2007 version. They left the vitamin E requirements the same as the 1989 version, but in the discussion, they mentioned that in the recent research that there were recommendations that were higher for the performance horse. So this is a screenshot of the table, one of the tables in the back of the book. And like I said, these are probably the most used, at least in what I do as a nutritionist. They have tables for 200, 400, 500, 600, and 900 kilogram body weight horses. And in each table, does my cursor show up? Hopefully it does. Anyway, they have the values, some nutrient values, as well as energy, and they have protein and lysine and calcium and phosphorus and magnesium, potassium, and then on to some like the minerals, and then some that's all the vitamins. And then it's divided by the type of horse. So they start with the maintenance horse, which they've even divided the requirements among the maintenance horse as minimum, average, and elevated. And then working, so light exercise, moderate exercise, heavy exercise, very heavy exercise. The stallions, they divided to non-breeding and breeding. And then the pregnant horses, they started from below less than 5 months pregnancy, and then by month all the way up to parturition. And then for lactating mares, the first 6 months of lactation. And growing horses, they really divided this one out from previous versions. So they have 4, 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, and then they included 18 months for horses that are exercising, and 18 months for more intense exercise, and then 24 months for just nothing, and then light, moderate, and heavy and very heavy exercise. So it's quite explained on them. And then another extremely useful table for myself, and I imagine veterinarians and other nutritionists, even the producer, is this one on nutrient composition of feeds. And then it's divided between concentrates and forages, and then fats and oils. And here it just gives you the nutrient breakdown of, like, these are just averages of different forages, and then concentrates, and then forages. And they will give values like dry matter, crude protein, energy, crude protein, lysine, fat, ADF, NDF, and then some minerals and some vitamins. Another page in the tables is composition of inorganic mineral sources, and these are all on a dry matter basis, and these come in handy if you have a mineral source like something calcium. These pages include calcium, phosphorus, sodium, chloride, potassium, magnesium, sulfur, cobalt, copper, iodine, iron, manganese, selenium, zinc, and fluoride. And if you had for example, a calcium source, and you wanted to know how much calcium is actually in that calcium source, this table here will give you that value, those values. So it's very handy. And another really handy couple of tables that are included in are the SI units, so what these abbreviations are, and then also temperature conversions from Celsius to Fahrenheit. That's sometimes come across stuff like that. And then if you find something that's in metric and you need to know it in imperial, or in the other way, vice versa, imperial, and you want to know it as a metric, then this is a conversion chart that's in the back of the book that's helpful for that. So just a couple examples of using the NRC. So if you looked into the chapter on digestible energy, you might come across something like this, these equations. And these are the equations for work, divided into light, moderate, heavy, and very heavy work. And if you wanted to calculate how much energy your horse needed, you could do it like this. Let's say we had a 550 kilogram racehorse, and he's in very heavy work, race training. Then you could use this equation here. So you would take 0.0363 and multiply it by 550, which is the body weight, and then multiply that by a factor of 1.9. And you would come up with 37.94 megacals of digestible energy per day. Now, the only thing in the book is digestible energy. There aren't any equations for metabolizable energy or net energy in this edition. Now, in the chapter on carbohydrates, they don't really have like equations for requirements for carbohydrates, but they do have some interesting additions into that chapter, like this table on carbohydrate composition. And I find this kind of useful. These are useful at times. This would be a good example. In that same chapter, you have the recommendation that to keep the diet under 2 grams of starch per kilogram body weight per meal, because if you go above that, it suppresses the cecal pH, which can affect the balance of the microbiome. So if you needed to know how much starch you could feed your horse and keep it under that max, you can use this table. So, for example, we have here our 500 kilogram racehorse, and we want to keep his meal under 2 grams of starch. So 2 times 500 is 1,000 grams. So you want to keep the meal under 1,000 grams of starch max. Now, the grains are not 100% starch. So here's where you can use the table, and you can look up oats, and you can see over here in this column, we have the percentage of starch, and it says that oats are on an average of 44.3% starch. And so you divide 1,000 grams divided by 0.443, and you get 2,257 grams of oats per meal would be acceptable for you to stay under, and that's about 2.25 kilograms. So looking through the book on protein, the chapter on protein, there wasn't a way to calculate the protein requirement, the total requirement for the horse, but they did have a little table with calculating the additional protein requirement that would be needed by above maintenance that would be needed by an exercising horse. So you can see here light exercise, moderate exercise, heavy exercise, very heavy exercise. And so we could do, if this example, if we took our 500 kilogram racehorse in very heavy exercise race training, we used our this equation. We could take 500 kilograms times 0.354 grams of crude protein per kilogram body weight per day, and that comes out to 177 grams of protein a day. So you can calculate that's just above the maintenance requirement. What's a little easier, I find, is just go to the table, that big long table that I showed you, and look under working and very heavy exercise and by 500 kilogram horse, and it says the total crude protein needed for the horse is 1,004 grams per day. So fats and oils have their own chapter as well. And again, there's really no requirement for fat in the diet of the horse. It's thought that the small amounts that are in the diet from the forage and whatever else they're eating usually covers the amount of fatty acids. There's never really been essential fatty acid deficiency reported in the horse, although anecdotally, I think we have maybe seen it. But fats are required in order for the horse to be able to absorb vitamins like A, D, E, and K, the fat-soluble vitamins. So I found this table in this chapter, and I thought this was kind of interesting because there is a lot of interest in these essential fatty acids, particularly the omega-3 and omega-6. There's a lot of interest in the balance of the two in the diet. And this table shows you the omega-3 and omega-6 fatty acid content of some of the most common vegetable oils. So, for example, you can see that corn oil has a very high omega-6 fatty acid content, while omega-3 has a very low fatty acid. It has a very low content of omega-3 fatty acid. But if you looked at something else like linseed, which is the same thing as flax, you can see that there's lower omega-6 fatty acids and about 3 times higher omega-3. So that's how we use this table. So there's chapters on minerals, and I just picked out calcium to do an example of. If you think about the exercising horse, it's going to have a higher requirement than a maintenance horse because there's concussion on the bones, and these forces of concussion are what regulate bone mineral deposition. And so if there's more concussion and higher intensity training, they're going to need more calcium in the diet. So the recommendations found on page 76 for light exercise, moderate, heavy, and very heavy, you can see they're graduated and they go up. And so in my example, I have my 500 kilogram racehorse in very heavy work. And they would need 0.08 grams of calcium per kilogram body weight, 500, and that would be 40 grams of calcium a day minimum in the diet to support proper bone metabolism. And again, you can look in the table, and there it is also. The nice thing about having these calculations is if your horse is not 500 and it's not 600 and it's not 400, it's 555, you can actually calculate what 555 times 0.08 would be to give you a more precise requirement. And then the chapter on vitamins, you can also find some information, some equations on how to calculate the requirement. And of course, we all know vitamin E is very important for as an antioxidant, particularly in the muscle tissue of the exercising horse. So light exercise, moderate exercise, you can see, again, it's graduated from heavy and very up to heavy and very heavy exercise. 2.0 IUs of vitamin E per kilogram body weight. And so in our example, we see that a 500 kilogram racehorse in very heavy work would need 1,000 IUs a day. And then again, in the table, it's exactly what it says, that a very heavy exercise would need 1,000 IUs per day, minimum. So here are the tables. So here's our horse, the very heavy exercising horse. And for the different nutrients, you can see that you can find. So, for example, I have vitamin E down here, 1,000, the calcium there. So, and protein vitamins. So using an example on using the nutrient composition table, this is really handy if you are trying to figure out what you're actually feeding the horse. So, so you know the requirement, but well, how much of those nutrients is he getting? So this has various concentrates, various forages, various just a few fats and oils. And so as an example, I picked out beet pulp. And so if you were feeding your horse 3 kilograms of beet pulp and you wanted to know how much energy was in those 3 kilograms. So, and we'll do the unmolasted. And so we find out that there are 2.8 megacals per kilogram of dry matter in that sugar beet pulp. And if we're doing 3 kilos, then that would be a total of 8.4 megacals of digestible energy supplied by that beet pulp alone. So when you think back to our hardworking racehorse needing 34 megacals of energy, well, this would be contributing this quite a significant proportion of some of the energy at 8.4 different. And just a little example of using these conversion tables that are in the back. Here in the US, we are stuck on this imperial system for some reason. And a lot of time horse owners come to me with how many pounds they have. Sometimes they just come with scoops. But if I'm lucky enough to get pounds from them, then to convert to kilograms, I would take this multiply by this amount, 0.4536. So if I had 5 pounds of something and I wanted to know how many kilograms, I would multiply and it comes out to 2.27 kilograms. So to finish up, I just want to briefly go over a little bit about the model that they developed for this last version of the NRC for horses. It is maybe a more convenient way to completely tailor the nutrient requirements to the horse, like particularly if you have a different weight than just the 500, 600, 400. So how you would use it, you go to this website right there, and then that screen, the first screen would come up. And then when you hit continue, you can put in the weight of your horse. And if it's a growing horse, then you're going to want to put the actual, as the mature weight. And if it's, a growing horse, you're going to want to make sure you have the current weight. And then you pick what type of horse it is. And so I picked a working horse, and then I picked intense exercise as the workload. And so down here, you'll see these numbers change automatically. You don't put anything into this part of at the bottom. It's where the calculations come out. So you have the animal requirements. And so like energy would have been 34.48, and the protein, there we are, 1,004, calcium 40, phosphorus 20. It's just a limited number of nutrients. There's more in another screen. But that's where you can find those. And then the next screen, if you wanted to know what your diet is supplying, there's some preloaded things like orchard grass. But actually, each of these different slots can be populated, so you can change. And then in this example, I just left what was populated here for orchard grass. So these numbers were already in there. But for alfalfa hay, I went to the nutrient composition table in the NRC, and I took those numbers and just plugged them in. So each of these slots, you can change those numbers. And then I went to the nutrient composition table for oats and put in the nutrient content. And then I put in the amount that was going to be fed to this horse: 6 kilos of orchard grass, 6 kilos of alfalfa, 5 kilos of alfalfa, 5 kilos of oats. And then what it does down here, here's dietary supply. And so it automatically calculates from those nutrients and the amount that I put in, that it's going to supply 35.56 megacals of DE. Food protein, it'll be supplying 2,049 grams. Grams, yes. And then lysine and so forth. Then it calculates the balance. So it tells me that I'm pretty close on that DE. Is just a little bit higher than in the DE. And the protein is almost more than double what the horse really actually needs for its requirement. Lysine, again, is a little bit higher. Calcium, so sodium and chloride together make salt. I did not put salt in here. I didn't put any minerals in here. And so you can see that this horse is not getting enough sodium chloride. And it would be a good idea if you were trying to look at this diet that you add salt to the diet. The program will also give you the requirements of some of the other minerals and then vitamins. The only thing about these is that it does not do the balance here like it is down below. So in summary, the National Academy of Sciences is the one that's responsible for giving us that National Research Council that published the 6th edition of the nutrient requirements of horses. And it just keeps getting better every time they put one out with tons of more information. It includes all these different types of horses. It's quite extensive. It covers the requirements for energy and protein, and carbohydrates and fats and minerals and vitamins, and includes water. It has the tables and equations for calculating nutrient requirements. It includes the computer model for looking up the requirements for selective nutrients. The one thing I have to say is, while this book does not balance a ration, it just actually evaluates the supply of nutrients in the ration. So the requirements versus the supply. But all the information is in this book for you to actually be able to balance a ration. And then there's so much more. So with that, I'd like to conclude and thank you very much for your attention.